September of 2023, a group of guys with Minnesota ties, who dubbed themselves Lightweight Luxury, headed out to the West Coast Trail. Many people consider this a hike of a lifetime. It's on the southwest corner of Victoria Island, about an hour and a half west of Victoria. The trail was established over 100 years ago, as this coastline became known as the Graveyard of the Pacific due to all the shipwrecks. Between 1888 and 1890, the government erected a telegraph line along the coastline. This allowed for communications between Cape Beale and the Carmana lighthouses. However, after the wreck of the Valencia in 1906, with the loss of 133 lives, the public demanded action. The government then built the Pashina Lighthouse, and then created this life-saving trail for shipwreck victims and their rescuers. Eventually, the trail was decommissioned, and in 1973, the trail became part of the newly established Pacific Rim National Park Reserve. Here were our campsites the first 5 nights. We stopped at the Fish and Crab Shack in Port Angeles for some authentic Pacific Northwest crab and seafood. Apart from the server forgetting to bring out my order until about a half hour later, the fish was excellent. We saw some sea otters just outside where we were dining. We flew into Seattle, got our rental car, or rental van, and drove over to Port Angeles, just west of Seattle, so that we could take the Port Angeles ferry north to Victoria. Night came and the ferry came in as well. The Port Angeles ferry was built in 1959 and had capacity for 100 vehicles. After a short stop at customs, where our apples were confiscated, we started the next morning at Tim Hortons, like one does when they're in Canada. Sorry. We attended our mandatory 30-minute educational session about what to do in different situations, including earthquakes, tsunamis, and encounters with bears and wolves. Shortly after, our 8-man crew jumped aboard this vessel and crossed the Gordon River to start our trip. Here's what day 1 looked like. Primarily forests, with a couple crossings of some creeks, ending up finally at Thrasher Cove. Stats on day 1, starting in the afternoon, ending in the evening, were about 5.5 miles, with about 1,300 feet of up and down. Right off the bat, our fear of heights were tested with climbing this ladder straight up. We were quick to learn that there'd be many ladders along the way. This is one of the steam donkey engines that we saw on the trip. It was connected to a cable and winch and used for logging. Terrain on day 1 was pretty pleasant, some nice forest hiking, with a very well-defined trail. We eventually descended to our campsite at Thrasher Cove. It was the busiest campsite that we'd come across on the trail. We would end up passing a lot of shipwrecks along the way, and at Thrasher Cove, the vessel Revere shipwrecked in 1883. Day 2 started off on the beach, and we ended in the forest before eventually getting to Coolite Creek. We encountered our first cable car as well. Stats on the day were about 9 1/3 miles, with about 1,000 feet of up and down. Hiking on the beach could get a little slick at times, but we were rewarded with some pretty cool views. We came across a few islands with seals on them. Eventually, we got to some nice shelf hiking across the beach as well. Run through. Day 2 breakfast was near some sandstone cliffs, where the shipwrecked William Tell landed in 1865. We came across some cool flora and fauna. We ended up seeing quite a few slugs along the way as well. And eventually reached our first cable car crossing. There were quite a few boardwalks along the way, which made the hiking quite a bit easier at times. had a fair share of tree crossings as well, however. We stopped for lunch at Camper Creek, where the John Marshall shipwrecked in 1860. We eventually made it to Coolite Creek. Day 3 started with a nice forested section before ending with a nice long beach section. Stats on day 3 were about 11.5 miles with 800 of up and down. Here's one of the suspension bridges we came across. They were pretty impressive structures. The views out to the ocean were pretty impressive too. We stopped for breakfast at Adrenaline Creek, which is known for being a surge channel, which could get dangerous when tides are high. We eventually got out of the forest and down to the beach. We transitioned from the forest down to the beach at Waldron Creek. We would quickly learn that beach hiking, although a little bit flatter, can be quite a workout for the ankles. We stopped at the Candy Shack for lunch. We also picked up some Reese's, O. Henry bars, and Juju beans. Unfortunately, they have to hike in all of the meat that they get, so they were out of hamburgers. The Carmina House Light Station was established in 1891. The first lighthouse was built of wood and attached to the keeper's housing. This current lighthouse was built in 1920 and made of concrete. Saw some pretty cool trees along the way, both in the forest and at sea. We came across a few more seal islands as well. We eventually got to our campsite at Cribbs Creek, and we had quite a showing of seagulls. Day 4 started off with a misty morning, and that made for some nice beach hiking pretty much all day. We had lunch at Nit Nat Narrows before ending at Susiat Falls. Stats on day 4 ended up being about 11.7 miles, with 1100 up and down. When we got to the falls, it not only served as a water source, but also as a place for a nice chilly bath. We found refuge under some trees since it was so misty that morning, near Dare Point, where its namesake vessel, Dare, crashed in 1890, as well as the Santa Rita in 1923. A lot of these rocky sections were quite slippery, even when it was flat. After a short forested section, we arrived at the Crab Shack at Nit Nat Narrows for our lunch. A well-deserved and long-awaited for real meal. I can't say I've ever had a meal fresher than this. Crab pulled up and cooked right before our eyes. We said goodbye to the California cohort of our group and continued on that afternoon. We had some really nice views from atop some cliffs overlooking the ocean. Just before camp, we came across some tracks, just to let us know we wouldn't be alone that night. Day 5 was a bit shorter and primarily beach hiking, so we made quick work of this day. We had one cable car crossing as well. Stats on the day were about 8.5 miles and 700 of elevation gain and loss. We came across quite a few sea urchins along the beach and saw a few crabs too. Our next cable car crossed the Klawana River, which was no joke. We stopped for breakfast along Trestle Creek, which was the site of the shipwrecked boat Woodside in 1888. We had a short section in the forest, along some boardwalks, and of course a few ladders. We came across our next steam donkey, this one on the north side of the trail. Most people we came across were pretty friendly on the trail. The animals were friendly too. It was a shorter day, so we got to camp early enough to have lunch there too. We camped alongside some friends that we ended up finding. Our campsite choice may have been a little premature. A little side adventure brought us north of our campsite, where we found some crabs going to war with not only themselves but also some snails. The vessel Michigan shipwrecked in January of 1893 at this campsite. And notably, the vessel Muscat went to try to salvage it in August of 1893, which also shipwrecked. After being rejuvenated from some great sights of the Milky Way and many shooting stars, we set out for our longest day, heading out from Michigan Creek to the small town of Bamfield for lunch, before heading to Kiha Bay, just north of the West Coast Trail. This day turned out to be about 17.5 miles, with 2,200 feet of vertical gain and loss. It started off a little bit cloudy, before eventually making it to the Peshina lighthouse. There was a little drizzle in the air, so we stopped in the forest shortly after for breakfast. It's always bittersweet getting back to seeing civilization. We enjoyed some easy hiking back into town. And of course a few more ladders, just for good measure. We followed a road into Bamfield, and were luckily a safe distance away from this little guy. The trail into the town of Bamfield was actually pretty neat with these elevated boardwalks. And ended up seeing a second one along the way as well, before making it into Bamfield. We stopped for lunch at the local market / gas station, and had to get some fish and poutine, of course. Sorry. We supplemented our meals throughout all of Bamfield with a plethora of wonderfully ripe blackberries. The hike from Bamfield to Kiha Bay was pretty gnarly. A lot of mud, a lot of roots, a lot of bushwhacking. It almost felt like you were going through a car wash at times. We were finally rewarded with a wide open beach, a bit foggy to start. We had some pretty stunning views, and the shore all to ourselves. The afternoon sunlight burned off a lot of the mist that was initially there. We came across some signs of friends who had been there before us. And again, we were rewarded with another epic sunset, just like every other night on trail. After enjoying our last night of solitude, we made it back from Kiha Bay to the Bamfield shuttle bus, which would take us back to our rental car in Port Renfrew. This was just a shorter day, about 5 miles with 500 of up and down. It was sad to say goodbye to this special beach. It had quite unique features. We explored this archway just to the south of our camp before heading back. It was tough to say goodbye to the beach. Although tough on our ankles, it provided a wonderfully soft place to rest at night. We were lucky enough to obtain permits to camp at Kiha Bay on this last night. We were rewarded with some great views and a good reminder of just how truly vast this area was.